Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our Listen and Learn workshop. In this session, we'll be focusing on the power of data and how to use it to influence and transform your decisions. I'm Tatiana Ferreira, the Chief Customer Officer at LaunchMetrics. I oversee all of our post-sales customer-facing teams, and I'm super excited to be hosting this workshop today. Joining me in today's session is Steve Brown, Buying and Planning Merchandising Expert at PVH. Steve has been working in the fashion industry for numerous international fashion brands, building collections and managing global vendor bases for the likes of DKNY, Calvin Klein, and many more. Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So let's get right into it. Steve, you've been working nearly 20 years in the industry with experience across product development, buying, merchandising. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences, what you did, what you do, and how these roles impact the business?
Yep, sure. So indeed, I'm getting older now. I've been working 20 years in the industry. About 15 of that is actually, I would say, hardcore product development. So brands like DKNY and Denim, I've run them from design up to production. So that's working with design on building the collection, merchandising, buying and planning, product development. So I always say that my world is kind of a 360 approach from design into warehouse. So the kind of roles that I've been doing is, say, product development, so building the collection, merchandising, so really working on the construct of the collection, and then also buying and planning, where managing a full vendor base, working on the buys, working on inbound, and then the full production planning. So that's kind of my world. How they kind of impact the business, obviously works in three approaches. So when it comes to kind of the merchandising function, I really see that as the link between kind of marketing, buying, and product development. When I'm in product development, obviously the impact to the business is to improve product margin, get a better inbound, negotiating on the FOBs. So I really see the impact to the business in the roles that I've done is a real 360 kind of approach.
Thanks for that. As someone who is, I would say, more maybe on the marketing PR side of things for fashion, which is where all of our clients operate, I always used to assume merchandisers would spend all their time in Excel. That was really what I knew about it. So I appreciate that summary and introduction. And how do you manage to split your time between these functions? It seems like you've had a lot on your plate. How are they different? How do they kind of all come together?
Yeah, I think for me, it's down to calendar. So when you're kind of working in our industry, you're normally working on about 3 seasons at the same time. So for example, depending on the calendar construct, you could be in a proto review. A couple of days later, you could be working on range planning for the future season. And then at the end of that week or the beginning of the week after, you could be at market launch for your current collection. So really, you don't split your time as such. You're just working to your clear calendar. And I'm all for a very clear and concise calendar, because you really want to plan your time effectively, because when there's 3 seasons at one time, there's a lot going on. So when it comes to the buying and planning portion, you're working with the vendors, planning your lead times, your capacities, you're working on your buys, your margin, your kind of stock position oversold. But then at the same time, you could be, for example, with the markets, building your range plans by region. And then on product development, you could then 1 week be at a factory. So if I look at my role at Denim, I really see that as a 360 approach. So I would be literally 1 week in Japan, and I would be working with the region there, working on product needs, key pushes, collaborations, really looking at the construct for the future season on that particular market. Then literally the following week, I could be in Portugal or Greece at the factory on the season later, shall we say. And I would be then working with the fabrics, working on FOB negotiations, planning the inbound, the fabrics, making sure that we prioritize key looks and kind of PR pieces for our market launch. So it really, really depends kind of what part of the calendar you're at. But normally there's always something going on when you work across the 3 seasons and you have that 360 approach.
So fast paced doesn't begin to cut it. I feel like people always use that word to describe fashion, but
you know,
you described it. I think that, yeah, definitely.
There is definitely a buzzword, you know. I mean, yeah. In most job roles, you'll hear things like work in a fast pace, like blah, blah, blah. But I think there is peaks and troughs in our industry, and you definitely have a bit of downtime, but most of the time there's always something going on for sure.
I'm never really sure what season currently is out right now if you're working on so many at once, probably. This next question is a loaded one because I want you to kind of dive into what are some of the key things that you look at when trying to make a business decision. And I appreciate, again, it's a loaded question. There are so many things, but if you kind of had to select ones that you would say are key or critical, what would they be?
I think when you want to make a business decision, it's kind of like you want to look at what you have to implement, if that makes sense. So if you're talking about markets or budgets, you want to make sure that that's what you're looking at. So I see it as kind of, when you want to make a specific business decision, it's like, what's the impact like of that decision? And also a lot of things should in theory be linked to strategy. So for me, it's like, if there's a 3-year strategy and you want to achieve these areas, and I mean, it could be prioritizing these 5 product groups, it could be elevation, it could be improving your ASP. It's very much about, you need to always keep in mind what the strategy is of what you're working on. And prioritization is really important because a lot of things can happen at the same time, and there's always extra projects, let's look at this. But I feel like to make a good business decision, you do need to prioritize what you're working on. And especially when it comes to kind of making more data-driven decisions, when it comes to range plan, I think things that you need to keep into account is definitely like, is the data clean? Like, is it coming from a good source? Because sometimes you need a bit of a data detox when there's so much flying around and everyone has an opinion of a number. So I think there'd be the things that come to my mind when you want to make a clean business decision. And of course, if you come down to the product level where you have a target margin, or you have, this is drop 1, so needs to be planned by this date, then of course, they're kind of KPI factors you'd have to look into to support that business decision.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about so often, like the cleanliness of data. A lot of people just whatever the highest KPI is, and they'll kind of take it at face value. But really the power is in understanding like what that data is saying, if it is clean, and not maybe adjusting for the cleanliness, right? So that's a really good point. I feel like that's not something that you hear often, like almost challenging the data that is available to you. You have to use it, but don't just take it at kind of point blank.
Yeah, and I think like, I always think if you're a new brand or you're someone that's just starting off, I think there's like some amazing opportunities out there now with these kind of startup companies and these efficiency AI companies, because I've met some in the past where you can literally click a button and it will automate your demand. It will link it to a PO. It will then send that directly to the vendor with a size breakdown. And I mean, when you look back in the past, like 20 years ago, we were sending style confirmation sheets via fax machine. And now you can automate it in 2 minutes, and it's taken your whole historical data and insights and automate your whole supply chain process. Now, that's super challenging when you try and implement that into an established big business, for sure. Right. But I really feel like if you're a startup brand, there's so much leverage you can get nowadays.
And I almost think it's, in some ways, it's almost easier if you're starting out, because you can start ground up implementing these things from the get-go, versus, like you said, I think the bigger the brand, the more legacy they have, infrastructure, technology, et cetera, almost the harder it becomes, because there's so many moving parts as well.
100%.
And how do these performance indicators or the data differ for the different teams that you've led? So specific to those different functions, are there common ones that you've looked at kind of across the different functions? Ones that all decision makers at a fashion or luxury brand should be looking at?
Yeah, I think probably the common goal of everyone is to get the right product on time, because I think everyone has a responsibility to stick to deadlines to make sure that the product arrives, because most of the time the product's planned for a drop because it's part of the marketing campaign or it's part of a global campaign. And if those goods don't arrive at that right month, then it doesn't really leverage the product on the shop floor at the right time. So that would be, I'd say, the common goal for everyone. But I think when you look in a sense of the kind of merchandising side, is very much about ASP, like average selling price, margin, your collection size, your overdevelopment, where you really want to look at these kind of key KPIs to see how you're trending. Because internally, overdevelopment is always talked about did we go 30% over what we planned? But you can do creative things to not really worry about that at market launch. But I always feel for the vendor, I'm always about, but what did the vendor do? Because the vendor could have made so much. And actually, you won't necessarily see that in the numbers. And I think sometimes when you want to look at the production versus sampling efficiency, for example, or why your FOB has been impacted this year on like-for-like product, you always do have to look internally of, did we overdevelop? Did we kind of cut 30% of the collection before we launched? And it's all these kind of efficiencies that data should, in theory, improve your performance. And that's kind of on the merchandising world. In the buying and planning from my previous roles, it's very much when I ran Calvin Klein Menswear buying planning, you would be looking at different efficiencies, of course, like inbound, but generally across my experience, you're looking at kind of your buy, so to your budget, your inbound performance, your stock position, your oversold. These, for me, in my experience, is where it's linked to buying and planning. And then, of course, product development is very much about the FOB, the calendar on-time deliveries. And of course, you want to make sure that you have the best product you can. So you really want to make sure that you invest in those fabrics, you're giving alternatives, you're really looking at sustainability. And I think also there is a strategic element to PD, of course, because you don't want to have a different fabric every option. You want to be able to get the best fabric that works for the strategy and utilize that across options, because then you make the minimum, then you don't get upcharges. So it's really, a lot of the time, it should be about making things more efficient for the business. And of course, there's different elements of, say, in my previous roles where we wanted to push women's wear more. So we allowed a bit more flexibility with the KPIs. But I think at the end of the day, you're managing a business, so you really want to be as efficient as possible. But of course, allow the creativity and allow the freedom to be able to develop the collection. Otherwise, you just have the same black dress every season, and you really want to bring newness to the table. So there's a lot of dynamics across that in regards to indicators with data.
Yeah, but it's kind of sounds like the recurring theme on the efficiency side. It's old saying, but it rings true, I think, in every business. Time is money, but you can't sacrifice quality, creativity at that expense. You just have to keep an eye on those metrics that are going to make you the most efficient.
Yeah, I mean, that's why collaborations are really important, because it brings newness every time to the brand. It doesn't necessarily drive huge revenue, for example, but it's about that newness. You're bringing new customers, you're bringing kind of an experience to the table, and that kind of, you really see at the moment, there's so many collaborations happening, and I think it's really important that it allows you to develop, it allows you to bring newness and a new identity to the brand, and that I think is really, really key. And at Denim, we did so many collaborations. We really regionally also looked at that. So in Japan, we had really specific regional collaborations, as well as in Europe. So there's also that planning of where you want to have the right product, the right match for those regions, to make sure that your target audience has that kind of, that feeling.
Right. And arguably with collaborations, you could even potentially be tapping into new consumers who maybe wouldn't normally associate with that brand or think about that brand. But the collaboration allows that to happen, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at Denim, we did a collaboration with Nike where we launched a range of trainers and high tops. You wouldn't necessarily say that Denim, which is a global denim tops outerwear brand, would be doing trainers with Nike. But it was incredible because we used that kind of East meets West artisan fabrics. We had this inlaid into the trainers. It was a super nice collaboration. So it really shows how you can definitely bring an edge to the brand.
Right. And how has decision-making evolved throughout your career? Obviously, the amount of data and insights has become more and more available, one would assume, but has it always been a key part of that process? And it's just that there's more available, or how has that changed?
Yeah, I think if I look back 20 years ago, when I was 21 and started as a kind of a trainee assistant buyer at Next Retail, I would say they were quite advanced when it comes to analytics at that point in time. But definitely moving into the more wholesale brand environment, it was definitely feeling, it was definitely salespeople portraying what they liked, what they think will work. And of course, when you really look at the numbers, you can confidently say that 80% of your sales came from 30% of the options. It doesn't mean that you only need to make a collection that size, but it really shows that there's efficiency to be had. And I think when it comes to years ago, it was totally feeling. But now when you look at companies like Edited that really can bring you huge insights, if you don't have the capabilities internally, they're a great opportunity to show you what your competition are doing on everything such as pricing architecture, markdowns, campaign imagery, push models. So that in itself has advanced so much compared to what it was years ago. And I think a lot of companies now are looking at data and they're looking at their own internal dashboards where you can really see clearly how the performance is. So with those sellout reads and sell-in reads, you really have a lot more concrete insights, even in wholesale, on what product is actually selling out. And that then definitely supports the future range planning stages, because now you can kind of, with confidence, pitch a bit more where you think you're going to be. But I truly believe that it's a bit like sustainability. It's a bit more of like a buzz conversation. It's not that everyone is doing it. Like, we're quite an old school industry, if we're super honest. People don't like change. It doesn't really change much. We're still doing what we did 20 years ago. But slowly and surely, these data insights and these kind of leverages that come, we see traction, and that's where it's super important. And my board advisor role in Canada with Tote, they are an exceptional example of how tagging, automated tagging on imagery, and how data insights through multitude of kind of visual recommendations can super support decision making and efficiencies. So I think it's leaps and bounds, but I'd say there's still probably 70% of the industry to start that momentum.
And I think when we think about how the industry is maybe a little bit slower to embrace change, especially on the digital and data side of things, it has always felt to me that, you know, a brand starts with analyzing themselves first and foremost, which of course makes sense. You have easy access to that data, and you should be looking at yourself first and foremost, how you perform season over season, year over year, et cetera. And I think what has changed, I guess, more recently are the brands who like take it a step further and look at competition, because as you were saying, that now is something that is available. Of course, you probably have to go through some kind of provider to get access to that external data. But I'm thinking back to Launch Metrics, which is obviously what I'm more familiar with, and the PR and marketing folks. But there's so much to learn about the competition, right? And benchmarking yourselves against the competition to see what else is going on in the industry. What are they doing? What's working for them successfully? And then, of course, consumer trends and all that good stuff. So I think that's like the next level of using data within the industry, is looking not just at yourself, but then also looking at what those other key players are doing in the space.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, you could say it's copying, right, in a weird way, but then when you look at every fashion show, everyone is doing the same thing. So it's quite interesting. It's like, oh, how did everyone know that high-waisted pants were going to be in? Or how did we know that the kind of the more structured silhouette is happening that we saw in the Paris Fashion Week? So it's very much like there is commonality anyway. And I think when you go to like the stores, or more so when you look at these analytics sites, there's a lot of leverage, because, for example, you may plan your pricing architecture across your collection and say, well, we're going to start at $29 and we're going to finish at $4.99. And you then hedge how many options or business will be at that price point. But then you could look at the competition and be like, God, did you know that actually 30% of their offer is at $349? So we never thought that that price point could actually be an opportunity in a similar customer base for us. So you definitely can leverage some of that experience and knowledge and think, let's try that. But of course, every brand has a target audience and you need to stick to your DNA. But of course, I mean, if you don't evolve in our world, then you're kind of left behind most of the time.
Right. And what is your current decision-making process? So what are maybe the things that you look at today, if they are in fact different than how you used to work?
Yeah, I think now, like, just basic things like when you go into a meeting, you're more, rather than talking about it, the current decision-making process is you're actually looking at documents, you're looking at analysis, you're looking at insights that can support. So whether you're making decisions on what the buy quantity will be, or is this the target margin for this season, there's many decision-making that's happening at the same time. But I think that the data insights that you get now can definitely support those decision makings, especially when it comes to strategy. So when you're planning, say, future products or future key stories every month, there's a lot of leverage that can be taken now from that information from the data that you have compared to before.
And I would imagine with, again, any kind of company and really any department, there's a lot less I feel like or I think like, and more, well, this shows this, which then connects to whatever maybe you feeling or thinking, but the data to kind of back up the thought process or the decision making that ultimately is happening.
Yeah, I think as well, like you kind of ideally want the correct data as well, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not like I drown every day in loads of Excel files or data. I mean, data supports all of our work every day. And I think at the end of the day, you can be in a position where you do get a bit lost in data. And my favorite saying is like you put X in and you get X out. So if you put bad X in, you get bad X out. So it's also, you have to look at like, if your sell in is this performance, but actually what was the true sell out? Because in a wholesale environment, your markets are selling in, but when the true customers come to sell out, that can be quite a different read. So it's definitely leveraging the right information, shall we say, to support the decision making.
And what role, if any, does merchandising play in launching new marketing campaigns for brands? Because obviously they're there, there's the planning component, but how does it connect with marketing?
Yeah, I think if I look over my roles, like at DKNY and at Denim and at Calvin Klein, the original roles, in the kind of merchandising function, there's a lot that kind of happen when it links to marketing campaigns. I think, of course, you have marketing teams and campaign teams, but when you're building the collection, for me personally, we would always start with monthly stories. So if this season has 3 or 4 drops, for example, what would be the key stories every month? And also, what is the key looks? So these are the key looks that we really want to portray this season. And I think not every brand does it, but it's definitely something I feel is a good thing to do, is having like a mandatory assortment for the buy. Because I think it's really important that if the effort has been done to launch these stories, launch the key looks, the marketing campaign is going to follow these monthly looks and campaigns to launch globally. I think whether you're in Sydney, New York, or Germany, everyone has their own buy, right? Like the individual customers may just want basic t-shirts, another one may just want formal wear. And I think if you plan, for example, 5% of your collection is this mandatory buy, which is linked to key looks, the kind of key stories, then I find it's a lot more of a global DNA in a way. Wherever you are in the world, those particular products are dropped at the same time globally, linked to the campaign. And I think that really then allows you to have a really nice kind of visual for the season, that everyone is following the same pattern and that the key looks are really being leveraged. And again, like collaborations, as I said, increases the engagement and excitement for the brand. So having these dropped in as well really allows kind of that to happen. And really, I think campaigns also geographically work quite well. So if you want to launch like a regional marketing campaign in Germany, then in some of my roles, we would be picking a particular product for that campaign and then working super closely with marketing to say, these are the stories, the products, the regional pushes, these are the products we want to make mandatory. And that then really allows kind of confidence that if our markets are buying into this, then we will have kind of more of a solid marketing campaign behind it, because you really don't want to be in a position where you've got some great key look product, but because it's quite expensive, quite unique, that no one buys into it, you don't make minimum obviously with the vendor, and then you have to cut it. So there's a lot of challenges that can happen in that world. So I really feel merchandising and marketing have a really solid link when it comes to this kind of collection build up.
And I guess the opposite can be said too, maybe, which this is an extreme case, but if there's not a good collaborative process, marketing could be pushing product that maybe isn't widely available or isn't available in specific markets, depending, of course, where they're pushing. So it's almost as if merchandising has to maybe dictate is a bit of a strong word, but in some ways dictate, like, this is, this is the brand identity. These are the key looks that we're pushing, et cetera. And then marketing really to push that out is what I'm getting a sense of.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely collaborative, that's for sure. Yeah. And I think, yeah, if marketing is involved in that process from the beginning, then there's that clear DNA and clear product push. I think, yeah, I don't think marketing would go out of their way to necessarily present a line that maybe doesn't actually get adopted in the end after a pricing meeting or something like this. So there definitely is really important collaboration for sure.
And we've, as an industry, as a world, we've been in what we call this digital landscape for a while now, and some are approaching metaverse. Metaverse is this another buzzword, I guess, that everybody's talking about. But as it pertains to that, which direction do you see the fashion industry specifically going, and what do you think will be important to keep in mind when connecting with consumers there?
Yeah, I think retail's really changing to be more about an experience. I think you've heard it before, but I really believe it's true, because the high street obviously suffered during COVID, that's clear, and e-com increased, but you do now see that retail is picking back up, obviously. Now everything's open and people are on the shop floor again. But I'm always like, you can go to any shop and roughly pick up the same type of thing. Like, you can buy a black t-shirt, you can buy a pair of jeans. Like, what makes you different to have a customer want to come to you? And I think that's what's really important when it comes to experience, that you kind of want to generate excitement. And when you have like collaborations, you, for example, may not like a brand necessarily, but you may love the brand that they collaborated with. And actually together, they may have made something amazing that you're like, epic. So this kind of allows the excitement to happen. But I really believe that when you go into a store, you want something extra than just racks and racks of clothes. And that's why now you see like interactive changing rooms. You see like coffee shops pop up inside stores. You see like interactive kind of 3D imagery where you can kind of be interactive with the clothes. This is kind of enticing people to come in. Now, the whole metaverse conversation is the other level. And I think it's also about what budget you have to be able to go to that world, because it's costly. But I really feel it's kind of cool, because the gaming industry has done so well, especially during COVID, that they've developed so much technology. And I think when you look at kind of, for example, Epic Games, they've partnered with brands from like Balenciaga to Louis Vuitton, and they've committed $100 million for kind of game creation in the 3D space. So it really shows that you can kind of just leverage this whole new world. And I think what's more exciting is that when you go into a store, you only see what's in that store at that time. But when it comes to the metaverse or 3D gaming, you can literally overnight personalize what you see. You can kind of present what you want the brand to be in this world. So it's just a whole new level of kind of interaction and customer engagement, which I think will do well for sure. And obviously, will it take over retail and e-com? At the moment, no. But is it that new excitement? Is it that kind of extra experience that customers are looking for? Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of still like testing and pivoting that has to be done as it pertains to fashion and the metaverse, right? And I think it is really impressive. Some of these brands that one could argue are legacy brands or traditional brands kind of playing a role or trying things out in the metaverse to see what works and really be innovative. Because as you said, I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think trying things out, learning from them, and then pivoting is ultimately what's going to set some of these brands apart. And again, maybe reach new consumers in the same way that collaborations do. Maybe entering into the metaverse, whether it's through gaming or some other way, could also offer that same or similar, at least, exposure.
Yeah, and I think also, for example, back in the day, it was bricks and mortar. Once that door was closed, no one saw anything and you couldn't sell. Then e-com became the 24-hour shop, right? You could shop when you wanted. And now you're in a position where you can actually 24 hours interactively play games and interact with the brand and the product to see what works or doesn't work for you. So everything is about the B2C, getting the business closer to the customer. And this is just another great example. And again, it will evolve again, like the world will continuously evolve.
Yeah, makes sense. And we touched a little bit before on competitive benchmarking and learning things from industry-wide trends. How much, I guess, do you think we can learn from other brands' successes and failures?
Yeah, I definitely think you can learn 100%. I think there's always a case study that you've heard about that you can kind of acknowledge we shouldn't have done that or should. But I also think there's so much information out there now on what brands are working on. And I think because everyone's so happy to promote what they're working on, everything becomes a lot more visible on what the companies are doing. But then I also do think that it's important that you do also have to stick to your strategy, because if you constantly react to what your customer or competition is doing, more the competition obviously, you're in a position where you're just constantly reacting and not kind of proactively planning what you want. And I think it's important that when you have a strategy, you have to evolve, of course, but it's also important that you all have something to reach, where if the competition is changing all the time, it's about, does that work for us? Like, is that part of our strategy? Does that actually not mean much for us? So I think there's evidence in, you can definitely learn 100%, but you also need to be true to what you want to plan for your brand and what that customer's looking for from you.
I think those are maybe one of the key places or moments where it does well for a brand to just pause, breathe, analyze, then plan. Versus just, oh, this competitor did this, like we should try that because look at what it did for whatever sales they may have had, earnings report that they may have done that they think may have been attributed to some strategic decision they made. It's not always just plug and play, obviously. If it was, then everyone would be doing it and everyone would be making a lot of money, right? So I think that's, one of the maybe key things or places to just pause and then plan is when it does come to that competitive benchmarking. Using that data to plan forward and not just change up every single time. And as we very early on into 2023, but what are maybe the 3 key metrics that you'll be looking at to hit your goals this year?
I think probably almost like keep focused in a way, like less is more. I think sometimes there's a lot of buzz and a lot going on. And I think sometimes it's really important that you have like a goal, which is like be focus on the key things and prioritize. That would be 1, I'd say. 2 is definitely alignment on process, because when you work on new initiatives or there's new things coming where changes are happening, whether it be supply chain or whether it be planning, it's very much you want an alignment, a collaboration on process, because most of the things come from a mindset change, and if everyone sticks to what they're used to doing, then it doesn't really move the needle. So I'm always about having a aligned, clear process. And I think probably on something particular specifically that I'm working on as a side project, I would say probably more kind of a wider data insights. So looking at Google Trends, macroeconomics, how they can align to kind of giving more insights. But there'd be kind of the three areas I would say that would be good to hit certain goals for me.
And we see it a lot with our customers as well, how important it is to be aligned on whether it's metrics, processes. I think processes even more so when it comes to efficiencies, the data they're looking at. When people are looking at different things, it tells different stories. So I think alignment is a good key phrase or word for people to focus and remember this year and really always, right? Like making sure that you're aligned with your partners internally and externally to make sure everyone is going in the same cohesive direction. And maybe looking back to last year a bit, what will you maybe take with you from last year into this year? And what's one thing that you'll leave behind?
I think for me, it's probably keep going, keep pushing, because perseverance does come with results. So I think sometimes the one thing I would do is, I would definitely bring that forward in 2023. And the one thing I would probably leave from last year is probably noise. I think overcomplication, noise, kind of keep that streamlined focus, because there can be a lot of initiatives, a lot of multitasking and crossovers of functions. And I think sometimes if you reduce that noise, reduce the overcomplication, the process becomes more defined, and then therefore you get better results. So I think that's something that you can never cut noise, but I would say reduce the overcomplication. I would definitely be getting rid of.
Yep. Focus on what matters.
Exactly.
And we're just almost at the mark to open up questions to the general audience, but maybe one last question. What's one piece of advice that you would give to executives who are looking to improve their 2023 performance? Like the $1 million question, but your advice, what would it be?
I think kind of in a team environment, it would probably be increased collaborative working, because I think the world's definitely changed. I think results have shown that hybrid working works. And I think it's definitely allowed everyone a work-life balance, which is great considering things are still happening. Of course, culturally, it can be difficult because you're not in that office every day building those connections, but I think you're still improving the performance. So I think the key thing for me is kind of increasing kind of collaborative working, and that way really improving performance comes from engagement and empowering teams. So however you do it remotely or not, I think if you engage and empower the teams, you will be able to get improved performance, and that I think is really important, because without the team nothing happens. So if you engage and empower them, then you will improve your kind of performance going forward, whether that be hybrid or in the office, etc.
Yep, absolutely. I always say to our teams and even other people externally, products and people are at the heart of what we do, right? And that's really any company. For us, it's our software and our people, but for a brand, it's the products they're pushing out and their people. If you don't have people at the heart of it, then might as well all go home. So makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what kind of questions we have that have come in. It's a great one. Where do you see improvement in the merchandising world when it comes to data? So there's a lot out there, but maybe there's better to be had.
I think, like, if you could almost start a clean slate, that's how I always see it would improve. Because I honestly think if you're going to look back 5-10 years, you're not going to improve anything because the kind of work's been done. But I think when it comes to merchandising, it's more kind of structurally, like, for example, if you use PLM, like most of the time the things that go into PLM cause confusion. So it's almost like having a structured approach to PLM, what information goes in there. If going forward you have guardrails, or you really define clearly what those product groups are or sub-product groups, that really allows you then to kind of get more concise information and more concise data to support the merchandising analysis. And I'm very much about kind of the markets have a role to play in this, because whether you're retail or wholesale, your regional customers, having that one aligned process where you can get that sell-through information back, whether it be in a system or whether it be kind of almost manually if you're in a smaller wholesale company, these kind of starting afresh with this types of process really support the merchandising decision. Because if you're a bigger company and you're looking at 10 years worth of history data, it could be a minefield. But if you say to yourself, you know what, we're going to do the next 2 seasons range planning pre and spring, and we're really going to start one structured approach to the markets and to kind of our insights. And this is what we're going to look at only to support pre-spring and spring going forward. Of course, you know your best sellers and you know strategically and you know what you need. But I think it's almost like start with the core information you can get and then just start building that up. And that's kind of because there's no easy fix in that way, but it's almost prioritizing what you want to see. And that's why if it's super challenging internally, I really feel like these external companies that can come to the table with these insights almost cut the noise out of everything you might be discussing internally.
And almost provide information that might be harder to get internally too, one would argue, especially the bigger the company is. There's so many different sources, people, tools, all the things that sometimes finding internally is harder than externally, depending on what.
It's also on budget level, like to
Right.
implement that, to align the process. It can be difficult to start up. So these external companies, they can bring those insights quickly to the table, which supports quicker decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And related to metrics, we have a question about one metric, if you could select one, to really give some kind of pulse check. So if there was a metric you'd use as a thermometer almost in terms of knowing where things are going and in what direction, is there one that you could choose?
There's so many. Honestly, I would say ASP, average selling price. I mean, there's so many, there's margin, there's so many, but ASP is really important because the average selling price means a lot. I mean, there's so much talk about sustainability and like, don't produce so many garments. But of course, people talk about revenue, right? Money talks. And I think really you can sell less product, but if you define your retail price strategy and you have that higher ASP, then I feel that's a really strong metric where you can really promote that we sold less, but we increased our business and we increased our average selling price. It kind of shows that you're not just churning product out. Of course, you would need to say sell less outerwear and a lot more t-shirts to drive your ASP. And this is where I feel that KPI is a really important one when you're looking at efficiency, strategy, and also growth. I think ASP that's one of many, but I think that for me always stands out.
Okay, I'll have to mentally note that ASP is to merchandising, sales for brands, as MIV is to PR and marketing. So that's more my world of things, but learn something new, ASP. Okay, and we have another question about the metaverse. How do brands keep their connection with customers in the metaverse? So I guess that experience we were talking about, how can brands do that and make sure that it's maintained?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very new world, and I'm not specifically in that world at all, but I think when it comes to brands, how they want to promote, I think for me it's just like another social channel in a way. So Instagram, Facebook, all of these kind of websites where you can promote your brand, promote your product, I really see the metaverse as being something similar, where you can get your DNA out, you can get what you stand for as a brand, and also with interactions from the customers, you can personalize those messages, personalize those interactions. So I really feel like that's the way the metaverse is going. And of course, when it's linked to selling product or be able to link that to your basket, then of course it's just another sales channel in a way, but it brings a whole new experience into kind of how you can sell or how you can visualize what you want your kind of brand to be. Because again, online or in bricks and mortar, there's not necessarily a full campaign video that shows everything that they're doing as a key look. You might just see jeans, t-shirt, and a jumper. But when on the metaverse and you see this whole interactive game playing and this whole kind of movie in a way of showing what the brand is and what the products are, it's just a whole, I really feel like it's like a social element to interaction for the getting closer to that customer. And then of course you get those insights back from the customer, what they're playing with, what product they're picking, how they're interacting. These insights then obviously is more information to support decision making.
And arguably maybe more real time at some point when the metaverse becomes more of a concrete thing that brands are playing in. And this is
I mean, when we talk about KPIs again, like UPT is units per transaction, there's all these different metrics of like, did these games or did these metaverse experiences increase engagement? Did they increase traffic into the store? Did the units per transaction increase? So there's all these metrics that of course you can measure on what that brings. But then I also truly believe that it's maybe not always about that as well. It's just actually bringing a whole new experience to the customer on how they can soak themselves into the vision and almost a fantasy of what that brand could be. It's that other element as well.
Yeah, I think there's, and this is simplifying it, of course, as the metaverse is still so new, but 5-10 years ago, I think the buzzword then was omni-channel. And I feel like metaverse is another one of those channels and now a brand's omni-channel strategy, right? And then
I mean, you could have like hero product, right? Like you could make your hero product that could be separate to PR campaigns, but this is your core product you want to look. You can then launch that into the metaverse. You can launch that socially. So you're also showing to your customers, this is our hero product. This is what we want to push it into the world. So it's almost, it's an advertising channel for sure as well when it comes to stuff like that. And those data insights that come back, it's a huge amount of data that you can get from interactive change rooms like QR, the kind of RFID tags, QR coding. All of this data supports massively your option count structure, your vendor planning, you're closer to the market's needs, and it brings so much leverage into building the collection for the future for sure.
I think what will be interesting is how brands can make sure that the experience they create for their consumers across all these different channels, the way they engage with them is consistent. Because I feel like that is the thing that we see consumers want, is consistency from their brands, that their brands have similar values to them. So the more places to play almost that a brand has, I think keeping it consistent across will be key and important.
Yeah, and it's generational as well, of course, because I mean, certain age demographics love to go to the store. They love to feel the product, look at the product. And then you have a whole new Gen Z, Gen X generation that are gamers, and can literally buy their product while they game. So
true.
it's totally target audience driven as well, for 100%.
And maybe just one more question we have time for with the last minute that we have. And this is about pairing data and creativity, like how you pair those two things together. Because I think for a long time, people would argue that, data is so black and white and maybe takes away from the creativity, right? So how do you do that? How have you seen that being done, especially in the context of innovation?
Yeah, I don't think they should compete. I think they should be able to work together. I think years ago it was just a creative brain. Now I see a brain as two halves. One is creative, one is data. And that doesn't mean that you can't innovate, you can't develop. In all of my roles in companies, it's all about design, it's all about innovation and newness. But at the end of the day, there's also no harm before you start to build the construct of the collection to say, okay, from these regions, from these insights, we see that actually we should be pushing more on knitwear, or we see that in Japan, our down jackets work really, really well. So this is something we should definitely have in the collection going forward. It's rather than building everything and overdeveloping everything and testing what we like and then narrowing it all down at the end back to option count, where you spent the money, you've kind of almost wasted the vendor time. It's come with a more targeted selection, come with a more focused range. This totally means that there's freedom for design to be creative and innovate and do what they want, but you're also then supporting them in ideas and suggestions of what worked and what we need to continue with to be loyal to the customer. But of course, newness is so important. So I think it should definitely work side by side. It should not be a competition between them.
What I'm hearing again is focus, right? Like maybe what data is doing is helping focus that innovation in a way that stays loyal and meets the consumer demand at the end of the day in that specific market or demographic or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's a mindset change as well, because obviously design historically designers, and I think when it comes to data, it probably is a challenge sometimes to listen to the numbers and be told this is a sell-through. But to be honest, it's evolving and it's working. I mean, in most meetings, people are talking about facts, they're talking about sell-through, they're talking about what works, what doesn't work. And honestly, in my roles in previous companies, designers have come to me, creative directors have come to me and said, let me know what the 5 key outerwear is that you definitely need next season. And I say these 5 because of sell-through, because of trend, because of blah, blah, blah. And then they're free to be creative to design into those kind of products that we know works. So that's why when you build a range plan, you're giving those boxes of suggestions, and for sure empty boxes, which allows you to be creative and come to the table with newness. It's a collaboration for sure.
Yep. Focus, collaboration, innovation. Those are like the themes I'm taking away from our 100%. Conversation. All right. We are just over time. So Steve, thanks so much for joining us for the conversation. And thank you everybody who tuned in. We hope that you took something away from our conversation, and we hope to see you at some point soon. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Take care.